She was still shouting when the steel blade punched through the side of the HOA office, sending papers and plastic plaques flying like confetti into the morning air. Her voice cracked mid-scream as she realized, too late, that this wasn't some protest. It was judgment. I didn't move, just stood there in worn boots, hands on my belt, eyes steady on the wreckage folding in on itself. Years of HOA tyranny, petty fines, threats, and fake authority crumbled in real time on land they never truly owned. My land. My name's Clay Whitaker. I'm 53 years old, and I own every inch of West Birch Lake, all 70 acres of it, lake, trail, water rights, and the woods that wrap around it like a crown. Been in my family since 1949. Passed from my granddad to my old man, then to me. It ain't a resort. It ain't a park. It's my home. People in town call it Whitaker's Water, even though the map still calls it Birch Lake. My place sits up on the ridge, a timber-framed lodge with weathered siding and a wide porch that catches the sunrise just right. You can see everything from there, especially trouble when it starts creeping in. I used to run an outfitting company that served mountain expeditions, logistics, gear, and survival training. Sold it 8 years ago after a buyout offer that let me walk away free and clear. Since then, I've been fishing, hiking, fixing up the lodge, and minding my own business. Until last spring, when trouble moved in, 5 miles down the ridge in the form of Clearwater Hollow, a brand new eco-conscious gated community with signs plastered in pastel blues and fake wooden fonts, a planned HOA neighborhood with brochures filled with buzzwords like harmonious living, shared values, and community-first design. It all smelled like lavender and lies. They didn't bother me at first. I figured they'd stay on their side of the tree line and I'd stay on mine. But people like that, they don't recognize borders. They didn't draw themselves. First came a neighborly letter stuck to my fence in a little envelope. It politely suggested I repaint the boat shed by the eastern cove to better blend in with the visual tone of their lakeside view. Said the faded red paint was visually disruptive. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my beer, then tossed it straight into the fire pit. That should have been the end of it, but it never is. Another note followed, this time about a warning sign I had posted on an old pine tree warning folks not to cross onto private land. They called it hostile language. I called it clear English. I'd maintained that trail for 2 decades before Clearwater Hollow was even a zoning idea on a city planner's desk. Now their trail signs were showing up on my property. Fresh wood, QR codes, fake rustic charm. Their map had absorbed my shoreline like a virus pretending to be friendly. One morning, I caught a couple with matching fleece vests and a doodle on a leash strolling across my dock like they were out for brunch. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in one hand. "You're 50 yards past the line," I told them flat. The man blinked. The woman frowned. They turned back. But I knew it wouldn't be the last time. Soon, they started sending what they called friendly compliance updates, notices about dock maintenance, lake usage, even the color of my porch lights. I piled them in an old ammo box by the front door, let them stack, let the storm build. Then they pushed too far. I was clearing some brush near the southeast ridge one afternoon when I spotted it. A brand new wooden bench with a metal dedication plate. It read, "Presented by Clearwater Hollow HOA Beautification Committee." They'd planted it 10 feet into my land. A bench right there, like they were claiming territory. I tore it down on the spot, took the pieces, stacked them neatly, and set them right back on their side of the line. That night, someone knocked on my door. His name was Travis, mid-30s, thin mustache, khakis like cardboard, held a clipboard like it was a weapon. Said he was the community liaison, wanted to open channels of respectful dialogue. I told him he had 20 seconds to get off my porch or I'd open dialogue with my sprinklers. He left in 12. I set up game cameras after that. Not for deer, for people. And sure enough, within a week, I caught 2 of their board members snooping around the dock with a measuring tape. I printed out the photo, stapled it to a post, and planted it at the trailhead. "Smile, you're trespassing," was written in bold under the image. Then came the president herself, Chelsea Hadley. Blonde, tanned, early 50s with teeth whiter than ethics. She showed up in a pearl-white SUV, stepped out like she was posing for a catalog, and introduced herself as if she were royalty. She said her HOA just wanted to maintain a cohesive lakeside aesthetic. I told her if she wanted control over the lake, she'd need a deed. She didn't like that. Switched from charm to threats like a flicked switch. I shut the door. But she didn't stop. Flyers appeared on my truck at the feed store. Teen volunteers started taking notes near the cove. Then came the post on their HOA Facebook page talking about unregulated lake activity and pollution from unapproved vessels. They didn't name me, but they didn't need to. The moment I saw my family's boat mentioned in their newsletter, our old, hand-built fishing boat that my dad and I had varnished every summer for 20 years, I knew where this was heading, and I knew exactly how far I'd let it go. Chelsea had declared war. It started with a letter, but not the usual soft-colored nonsense they've been leaving like HOA propaganda valentines. This one was certified, delivered by a nervous kid who looked like he didn't even want to be part of it. The return address said, Clearwater Hollow Environmental Review Committee, a title that sounded official until you realized it didn't exist a month ago. Inside was a glossy, overseasoned packet stamped with a fake seal and loaded with made-up charts. The accusation? That my boat, yes, the same hand-built wooden boat my father carved with his bare hands in 1975, was an environmental hazard, a visual pollutant, and, my personal favorite, a community water aesthetic disruptor. It read like a college thesis written by a marketing intern. At the bottom, in bold type, it said I owed $500, 0 cents in compliance fines. Failure to pay within 2 weeks would result in enforcement actions. In smaller print, it stated I'd been placed on Neighborhood Watch Tier 2, like I was some kind of criminal. The problem was simple. I wasn't in their neighborhood. Not by deed, not by covenant, not even by imagination. My land predates their bylaws by 4 decades. You could walk into the county clerk's office and find my family name on the original lake charter. But that didn't matter to people like Chelsea. Facts were less important than control. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. I pinned the notice to the fridge under a magnet shaped like a trout and carried on with my day. But Chelsea wasn't the kind of person who handled laughter well, especially when it wasn't directed at one of her community theater productions. A week later, she returned. Not alone this time. She stood at the edge of my dock, arms crossed like she was posing for a courtroom sketch, dressed in pure white linen like she was too sacred to touch the soil, flanked by 2 HOA enforcers in matching polos and wraparound sunglasses who looked like mall cops on a camping trip. "You're in violation," she said, skipping right over hello with it. "Of what?" I asked, walking out with a mug of coffee. "Being too good at boating?" "Section 4.2 of the Water Preservation Act," she replied smugly, holding up a tablet like it was the Constitution. "That's not a real thing." "It is now," she chirped. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just pushing boundaries. She was inventing them, creating fake regulations, fake committees, and hoping I wouldn't push back. I turned to the 2 goons. "Y'all trespassing today, or just practicing your squinting?" They didn't respond. Chelsea smiled wider. We've received reports about your vessel. Oil leakage, fuel concerns. It's a hazard. We're taking appropriate steps. I glance at old Betsy, our 19-foot cedar beauty with a brass-rimmed hull and varnish that glowed like honey in the morning sun. That boat was cleaner than most kitchens. That boat's tighter than your legal arguments, I said. Now get off my dock. Chelsea didn't budge, but I did. I turned around and walked back inside, not because I was backing down, but because I wasn't wasting oxygen arguing with a power-drunk HOA president. What happened next changed everything. The next morning, old Betsy was gone. I stood at the edge of the dock, rope ends frayed and dangling, the water unnaturally still. No waves, no ripples, no drift. She hadn't floated away, she had been taken. I walked the shoreline, checked my cameras. Nothing. It was surgical, too clean to be chance. And that kind of silence, it doesn't happen by accident. That's when she showed up again, Chelsea, this time on a stand-up paddleboard like some smug lake prophet. She glided close to the dock, grinning like the cat that stole something sacred. "Looking for something?" she asked. "You've got one chance," I said, my voice steady. "Oh, your boat?" "It's still here, just underwater," she said sweetly. "We relocated it, for the good of the environment." My breath caught. "You what?" "I filed an emergency motion under the Vessel Mitigation Program," she said, like she was reading off a script she wrote herself. "It was a necessary environmental action due to community concerns." "It's not your damn lake," I snapped. "Actually," she said, flipping her tablet to a satellite map, "the Clearwater Community Overlay includes this body of water." I looked at the map, which was about as accurate as a child's drawing. "That overlays a fairy tale." "Not according to our bylaws," she said, and paddled away like a smug little swan. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding like a drum. That boat wasn't just a vessel. It was memory. My father's voice teaching me how to start the engine. The smell of pine mixed with gas and summer air. Early morning fishing trips. Sunset cruises with friends. They'd taken something irreplaceable, and Chelsea was proud of it. I dove that afternoon. Wetsuit, dive light, weight belt. It took over an hour, but I found her. Tipped on her side, 30 feet offshore, resting like a fallen monument beneath 15 feet of water. The hull was intact, but scuffed. The tow rope was sliced clean. Someone had deliberately sunk her. When I surfaced, soaked and shaking with cold and fury, I didn't yell. I didn't call the sheriff. I walked straight to the barn, to the steel cabinet where my grandfather stored our original land deeds and surveys, and I started pulling every file I could find. Chelsea Hadley had declared war. But she didn't realize that when you fight a man on his own land, you'd better know exactly where the line is drawn. I spread the documents across my barn workbench, survey maps yellowed with age, original land deeds handwritten in fountain ink, blueprints rolled tight like old scrolls. My grandfather, Warren Callahan, had filed them back in 1954 when the lake still bore his name, Callahan's Hollow. And there it was, in clean black and white, the full boundary of our land wrapping around the lake like a protective arm. I lined it up with the digital map Chelsea's people had been waving around. The discrepancy was obvious. 30 feet off. Not east, not north, south. Right under the gleaming HOA building. I didn't jump to conclusions. I paced the boundary myself. Starting from the iron stake my grandfather drove into the earth beneath a black walnut tree at the southeast corner. I followed the old markers, the stone post near the fallen fence, the moss-covered bench, and the rusted lantern hung from the pine. I measured every step, checked GPS coordinates twice. When I reached the HOA's office, Modern glass, faux columns, and an obnoxiously large Clearwater Hollow Welcome Center sign. I stopped dead. The whole damn structure was sitting squarely on my land. It wasn't a sliver or corner, it was a full 3,000 square feet of trespass. Their back patio? Mine. Their solar panels? Mine. Their so-called community boardroom with the lake view? Definitely mine. It was like they'd built their little empire with monopoly money on a real man's deed. I sat on the bench just outside their lobby, technically now my bench, and smiled like a man who just found the ace at the bottom of the deck. I called Calvin Green, a retired surveyor who owed me a favor from the time I helped him dig out his old truck after a snowstorm 2 winters back. Calvin brought a drone and a 3D mapping kit. By sunset, we had a topographic scan, time-stamped, geotagged, and legally airtight. "You're not just right," Calvin said. "You're rich. They've been using your land without permission for 10 years. That's damages, back rent, and probably punitive action, too." I spent that night not angry, not even triumphant, just focused. At the dining room table, I laid out every document like I was drawing a war map. I wrote up a formal notice of land encroachment, then added a cease and desist order for their building. Then I called 2 lawyers, Marissa Chase, a no-nonsense civil litigator, and Carl Mendoza, a real estate specialist known for making judges quote him in ruling. Both confirmed what I already knew. I held every card. By Friday morning, I was standing at the edge of the HOA building with a sign in my hands. I planted it 10 feet in front of their entrance, bright red letters on white aluminum. "This structure is on private land. Legal action pending. Vacate or face consequences." They saw it within the hour. First Chelsea emailed, then Brent, their smug vice president, then someone named Trent Delaney-esque, representing them, all polite at first, hoping I'd come to the table or resolve things amicably. I didn't respond. 2 days later, they made the biggest mistake yet. They held a board meeting inside the building. On my property. I walked in wearing a flannel shirt, boots, and a chest-mount GoPro. The receptionist froze. I gave her a polite nod and walked straight through the lobby doors like I was walking into my living room. Chelsea was mid-sentence, giving one of her peppy speeches about community vision or shared goals or some other HOA buzzword. She stopped cold when she saw me. "You're not welcome here," she hissed. "Chelsea," I said, pulling out a laminated deed from my folder. "I own the land under this floor, which means I'm exactly where I belong." He blinked. "This building is part of Clearwater Hollow. It's protected under municipal permit." "No," I said calmly, stepping forward. "It's built 30 feet into Callahan property. Your survey was wrong. Your permits don't cover it. And you've got 30 days to clear out or face a demolition order." Gasps rippled through the room. Brent dropped his pen. One woman actually stood up and said, "Wait, is that true?" Chelsea's mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned and walked out. I didn't need to yell. The truth had landed like a thunderclap. Back home, I drafted the formal eviction notice. Heavy stock paper. Gold-embossed letterhead. I paid a bonded courier to deliver it the next morning, wearing a navy suit and mirrored sunglasses, just for effect. The letter was clean. "You have 30 calendar days to vacate the structure located at 87 Clearwater Hollow Lane. This structure is unlawfully occupying 3,254 square feet of private property under parcel 11876A. Failure to comply will result in removal proceedings, court-backed demolition, and claims for back damages. No insults, no drama, just law." The following week, Chelsea tried every card in her deck. Propaganda flyers titled "Community Under Siege" stuffed in mailboxes. A dramatic Facebook Live video in front of the building saying I was destroying harmony, and attacking democracy. She even claimed the HOA office was a cultural landmark. The judge literally laughed in court. "It's a prefab modular unit from 2013, he said, smirking, with vinyl siding. Appeal denied. That night, I marked the boundary around the building with red flags every 2 feet. A clear message. Tick, tick, tick. The clock is running out. The morning of the demolition arrived cloaked in mist and silence, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I was up before sunrise, brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to chew, then stepped out onto my porch, overlooking Callahan Lake. Still, waiting. At exactly 6:00 a.m., the Monroe County Sheriff's Cruiser rumbled up my gravel drive, followed by a second county vehicle and 3 trucks loaded with demolition gear. Sheriff Harris stepped out first, his broad-brimmed hat low over his brow, sunglasses masking whatever he might be thinking. He gave me a nod. "You ready, Callahan?" I took a long sip and said, "Been ready since the day they poured their first foot of concrete. The demolition crew got their paperwork." I pointed at the glass and steel monstrosity masquerading as the HOA headquarters and said, "That one. Treat it like it owes you rent." Word must have gotten out, because a crowd had already started forming. They were board members in polos, residents in lawn chairs, a few news cameras off to the side. Karen showed up late, naturally. She parked her white Lexus sideways, heels clicking across the pavement as she stormed up, shouting before she even reached us. "This is illegal," she screamed. "You can't do this. We filed an emergency appeal." Sheriff Harris barely flinched. Appeal was denied. 30-day eviction expired at midnight. Structure is in violation. You're trespassing. She turned to me, face flushed and furious. "This land belongs to the community." I held up the deed. "No, Karen, this land belongs to me. Your community just built the wrong house on it." The bulldozer started up with a low growl that felt biblical. Karen made one last attempt at martyrdom, stepping in front of it with arms outstretched like she was daring the machine to prove her wrong. Sheriff Harris motioned to his deputy, who gently moved her aside. The bulldozer crept forward, slow and steady. It bit into the landscaping first, ripping up flower beds and decorative plaques like they were tissue paper. Then the glass walls shattered in a glorious crash. The HOA's framed bylaws, fake awards, and coffee station exploded into dust and drywall as the second dozer joined the job. People gasped. Some cheered. Karen sobbed, but I stood silent. Boots planted in the soil with my name on it. The machines kept working. Cracking foundation, ripping up wiring, crushing support beams like twigs. I caught Brent, the HOA's vice president, trying to sneak away with a box of files. "Leaving so soon," I called out. He froze, mumbled something about preserving records for legal reasons. "Don't worry," I said. "They've already subpoenaed everything. Might want to keep that laptop charged for the audit." By noon, it was gone. Just rubble, dust, and a twisted flagpole lying in the dirt. The demolition crew packed up, nodded goodbye, and drove off. I walked the perimeter alone, touching each survey flag like it was a gravestone. Sheriff Harris joined me. "Hell of a thing," he muttered. "Never seen a homeowners association get bulldozed before." I nodded. "First time for everything, but it won't be the last." That afternoon, I stood at the lake's edge as a small press conference unfolded. Local reporters showed up, cameras rolling. I kept it simple. "I'm not against communities," I said into the microphone. "I'm against fraud." This HOA was built on stolen land, fueled by intimidation, and defended by fiction. Today, we reminded everyone that land still matters. Erin didn't show her face that day. Or the next. Her Lexus disappeared from the neighborhood by the weekend. For sale signs popped up all over the Eagle Point development like mushrooms after a storm. Within a month, the HOA formally dissolved, citing unsustainable legal exposure. Investigations followed. Turns out the HOA funds had been used for all kinds of luxuries. Karen's personal spa trips, her backyard gazebo, her so-called leadership retreats, every dollar refunded, every citation voided. As for my boat, old Daisy, I hired a salvage crew to raise her from the lake. She came up waterlogged, but intact. I spent weeks restoring her, sanding each cedar plank, rewiring the motor, polishing the brass until it caught the sunlight like fire. I docked her right back in her place with a new sign posted, "Private. Trespassers will be publicly shamed." And just for closure, I placed a stone marker where the HOA office once stood. Carved into it were 5 words. Here stood the empire of arrogance. Now, kids come take pictures with it. Neighbors nod in respect. And me, I sit on my porch with coffee in hand, breeze on my face, and the lake still as glass. Peace earned, not inherited, not granted, earned. I didn't rebuild the fence. I didn't plant new grass where their office once stood. I left it bare, just soil, rock, and that lone stone marker as a reminder that false power crumbles when it meets truth backed by ownership and grit. People still ask me why I went so far, why I didn't just let it go. The answer's simple. Because they didn't just sink a boat. They tried to erase legacy, rewrite the rules, and claim ground that never belonged to them. That lake, Callahan Lake, isn't just water. It's memory. It's my father's laughter echoing across the morning mist, my mother's coffee steam rising with the dawn, generations of hand-built dockwork and late-night stories under stars. Karen and her clipboard brigade thought they could tame all that with paper fines and HOA jargon. But paper burns, and land remembers. The new neighbors who moved into Eagle Point after the fallout are different. Quieter. They wave when they pass, they keep to their yards, and no one's posted a flyer on my windshield since. Sometimes I see a few of them walking the lakeside trail, pausing by the stone marker, reading it out loud to their kids. I don't interrupt. I just sip my coffee from the porch and let the quiet do its work. As for Karen, last I heard she moved to Arizona, tried to start over in a new gated community. Some say she tried to run for HOA president again. I like to imagine the look on her face when someone handed her a copy of her own story, cut captioned and edited into a viral video seen by over 2 million people and counting. That's the thing about arrogance. It assumes it won't be seen. But eventually, someone's camera is rolling, someone's watching the edges, someone remembers what the ground used to be. And, if you're lucky, someone's willing to fight for it. So here's the lesson. If you stand for nothing, they'll build over everything. But if you stand your ground, really stand, with deeds, truth, and patience sharper than steel, you don't just win. You remind them that land has a voice, and sometimes that voice carries louder than any HOA meeting ever could. If you felt something from this story, if it made you angry, inspired, or even just a little more alert to how power tries to creep where it doesn't belong, drop a 1 in the comments. If you didn't like it, hit 0. That tells me how to grow, how to keep getting better, and how to keep fighting the stories worth telling.